Hey, everybody. Welcome to the NFL Draft, NFL Mock Draft Show, CBS Sports HQ. Not even CBS Sports HQ. I'm all discombobulated. Pick Six Podcast. I'm confused because Will Brinson's here, which is a good thing, but we're talking draft. Episode 2, week 2, same crew, Josh Edwards, Chris Trapasso. We're going to get right into this thing. So last week we did a little mock draft conversation. This week we're going to do a little guys who are rising and falling based on the mock draft. But before we get to that, a few things here. Subscribe, Pick Six Podcast on YouTube. I think it's youtube.com/Pick6. So subscribe to that. Not only do you get the draft shows, you get every live show we do, which I feel like happens 2 or 3 times a day as we get through the middle part of the schedule here. So look for that. You can like this video. I would appreciate it. You can comment with your favorite prospects that you want to talk about. You can hit the bell notification so you don't miss anything if that's your jam. As an old person, I don't like getting notifications on my phone, but apparently young folks like being notified about when things going on. So do that if that makes you feel good. I mentioned the live shows. We do live recaps for the post games on Sundays, Mondays, Thursdays. I would imagine Debo's going to make us do the Saturday live recaps once we get to that part of the schedule. So if you like me, subscribe. Bell notification. If you like Brinson and or Breach, subscribe. If you hate Brinson, subscribe and tell him that you hate him. There's really no way to lose about this. And by the way, before we get to this, the draft conversation with Josh and Chris, today at 3:30, Tuesday, November 2nd, going to have another live show. Trade deadline special. Debo has coined it. So come for that. We already had a few trades. Mel Ingram has worked his way out of Pittsburgh. He's in Kansas City. That's something we'll chat about. Charles Omenihu is leaving Houston, and he's probably driving as fast as he can out of Houston to San Francisco. That's another trade that's happened, and there'll be hopefully a lot more, and we'll see what happens with Deshaun Watson. All right, so let's get to this. Let's get it started. So before we do winners and sort of risers and fallers of the first 2 months and change of the college football season as it relates to these prospects and their draft rankings. Let's take a look at the old draft order, courtesy of Tankathon. And not surprisingly, after the Lions lost by 200 points to the Eagles, they're currently sitting atop the old, they got the first overall pick here. Then it's followed by the Texans, almost equally as terrible team who somehow won a football game. Debo's Eagles have the Dolphins pick at number 3. I suppose the good news for the Dolphins, there are no good quarterbacks in this draft class that probably take that high, so you're not losing out on Trevor Lawrence, for example, but still, no one expected the Dolphins, especially Brian Flores, I would imagine to be a one-win team, followed by the Jaguars, Giants, Washington, Jets, and then Debo's Eagles legitimately have the 8th pick, but they're working their way down the draft board according to Debo anyway. So, Josh, I'll start with you. If you're the Lions, and I was on HQ on Monday with Brady Quinn, and I have Kayvon Thibodeau going number 1 overall. It's almost a knee-jerk reaction at this point. Let's say you're the Lions and you're not taking Thibodeau. Who are you targeting there?
Oh, man, that's tough. I think you would give consideration to a quarterback, but for any of these quarterback-needy teams, I think the exercise that I go through on a weekly basis is prospect X, is prospect Y that much of a better option for you than Jared Goff?
Right.
Which, Jared Goff is a serviceable quarterback. He's had his good, he's had his bad. I think that's a lot of what you get with this quarterback class this year as well. You get a little bit of good, you get a little bit of bad. I don't think there's a Trevor Lawrence or a Joe Burrow to where you're confident in taking a quarterback number 1 overall. So Thibodeau would be the only option for me, but I guess you could consider Derek Stingley as well, because Jeff Okudah has not lived up to the expectations thus far. He's battled injuries a little bit.
They should make Jeff Okudah announce that pick.
Yeah, that would be tough. That'd be like inviting a quarterback to your draft party, knowing that you're going to take a quarterback, like the Bears did with Mitchell Trubisky. But I'd say probably Stingley would be the one that I consider. But to me, it's still kind of a slam dunk that you take Thibodeau if you're not seriously in the quarterback market.
Yeah, I feel like it's the safest pick. It feels like he is not Chase Young in terms of projection and production to this point. But in terms of that draft 2 years ago, before Joe Burrow came out of nowhere, it felt like Chase Young, everyone was consensus on him. And I think Thibodeau's safe in that sense. Let me ask you this, Traps. Lions, Texans, Dolphins, Jaguars. Of those 4 teams, who is your front runner to get that number 1 overall pick? Is it still the Lions? Because I'm still on the Dan Campbell train, even though the train hit a mountain last week.
Yeah, I would say that it's probably the Houston Texans. I think their organization just is the most dysfunctional, even more so than the Lions at this point. I'm with you. I mean, Dan Campbell is kind of that old school guy, like running his team like it's the mid-90s, but he is super emotional. They are really behind him. I think they can squeak out a win or two down the stretch. And as for the Houston Texans, just really quickly, to trade Charles Omenihu, like a young pass rusher who's playing really well, like that makes absolutely no sense to me. They are going to get Tyrod Taylor back soon, but I think the Texans are probably the team. And maybe it's due to a tiebreaker that ultimately ends with the first pick.
Yeah, Tyrod Taylor being injured hasn't helped that team. He has the worst luck when it comes to health-related issues and sort of odd injuries that sideline him. Last year, of course, was the punctured lung that led to Justin Herbert being Justin Herbert. And this year, they didn't look terrible when he was in there the first week and a half of the season. And Davis Mills is a rookie playing behind on a terrible football team, and Davis Mills might be good. It's really hard to tell because I would imagine Aaron Rodgers would struggle on this Texans team, and he would be driving Charles Omenihu to the Northern California right now as we speak if that were his situation. All right, let's get to getting here, as they like to say. Let's talk about some risers I think we're heading into week 10 of the college football season. Josh, I'll start with you. I got your list in front of me, and Josh is so deep into the draft process at this point. Like, I'm 100 guys in. Josh is on guy 450 as early November, and so some of these names. I'm not familiar with the Central Michigan offensive tackle, so I'm interested to hear this. But let's start with one that we all know. Matt Corral is a riser. I don't think that's a controversial selection, but let me ask you this about Matt Corral. Where does he rank if he were coming out in last year's class, assuming he's the player he is right now? And assuming he's a top 10 pick, what's the best landing spot for him? Because the issue, we see this every year, if you go to a terrible team, you're going to struggle, even if you are Trevor Lawrence or Zach Wilson. We didn't really know about coming out because he was sort of one of these out of nowhere guys. And, Trey Lance is – the 49ers aren't great, but he's struggled in the opportunities he's had. Maybe that's from lack of experience. So tell me about Matt Corral. Where would he be on your list last year, and what's his best landing spot if he's a top 10 guy?
Yeah, so last year I probably had him somewhere on day 3. This year you've seen the development in terms of his decision-making, how
Josh,
quickly
let me clarify. Sorry about that. If he were the player he is right now, where would he rank among the top, the first round guys last year?
Yeah, so among the first round guys last year, he probably would have been, let's see, 5th. I think. Am I doing my math correct here? I think
that better be behind Mac Jones. But go ahead.
He would be ahead of Mac Jones.
There it is.
As well as Mac Jones has played, I still think the upside is just higher for some of those other guys.
Oh, 100%. I don't disagree with that.
But Mac landed in a perfect situation, and I think that's what you're trying to find with Matt Corral as well. So we've seen the decision-making improve. I think when you're looking at that Lane Kiffin-style offense, you're really projecting how he would transition to the NFL. And you have to rely on the traits, what you see. So I like his quick decision-making. I like how he throws with touch and anticipation. And we've seen that he's capable of throwing with strength to all 3 levels. So when you get that in terms, in addition to his leadership, his command of the offense, I think there's just a lot to like about his game. Toughness. I mean, yeah, incredibly tough guy. So there's just a lot to like about his game. That's why he's risen so much for me. I think you're kind of seeing the consistency that we had hoped to see from him last year. He's just making much better decisions with the football. In terms of where he might fit best, we can look in previous years, and there's teams that have those early picks where you're saying this is a good supporting cast where he could be thrust into and succeed early. This year, there's a lot of teams with bad offensive lines in the top 10. So not a great situation really at all available to him. I'd say maybe a team like Washington.
Let me ask you, is Washington and you can push back on this if you want. I know Debo's going to be Washington or Philadelphia. And this assumes that you think that Matt Corral might be more upside than Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I think he's got more upside than Jalen Hurts, specifically as a passer. I think he's just a more well-rounded passer than Jalen Hurts is. in studying the rookie rankings each individual week, I watch Devontae Smith. I see a lot of the missed opportunities on the field that Philadelphia has had, and I think Matt Corral is someone that would limit those amount of opportunities. Now, I'm not saying he's Joe Burrow or Trevor Lawrence, as I said at the top, but I think he does represent an upgrade over a guy like Jalen Hurts. The only thing is, Philadelphia's offensive line is very patchwork right now. They've got some aging parts. They've battled with injuries. Like, can you rely on that moving forward? That's why I'm a little hesitant to say that maybe they're a better fit than a team like Washington, who I think has some nice pieces. Like Sam Cosmi has been injured a lot this year, but he was really good when he was healthy this year. And then you've got Brandon Scherf as well, if he can stay healthy. So you see some of those pieces in Washington that I think can at least get you excited about the potential of that coming together.
And you would like to think that this Washington defense isn't going to be terrible forever, given that they're stocked with first rounders and played really well last year. All right, Josh, before I circle back to the rest of your risers, I'm going to just jump over to Traps and make this do the quarterback continuity conversation here. You have Jake Haener out of Fresno State, who folks have been talking about a little bit this year. They played Oregon early in the year, I believe. I think that's the game where Thibodeau got hurt. What do you like about Jake Haener, and realistically, how high can he end up going?
I just wanted to pick Jake Haener because we're coming off the weekend of the backup quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah.
And watching Haener, he's small. He's listed at 6'1", like under 200 pounds. I don't even know if he's that big. But starting in the summer or going into the season, like he was not on the draft radar. Like he was the starter last season, didn't put up huge statistics. He's completing 67% of his passes. I like that about him. 23 touchdowns, fewer than 10 picks. The yards per attempt average is well over 8. I like that as well. And just watching him, he kind of has a little bit of that Zach Wilson, like improvisational skill that's just natural to his game. Like he's not making the off-platform throws that Zach Wilson made last year, but he has a surprising arm for being how small he is. And like when things break down, he's not just crumbling in the pocket. He's not making bad decisions. He's not afraid to fire the football over the middle. I kind of feel like he's Matt Corral in a way, that he's very aggressive with the football. So I think probably as high as we'll see him is maybe the 4th or the 5th round. And maybe that's not super exciting for a lot of teams. But again, as we just saw in week 8, if you have a quality backup that you can win a game or two while your starter is out, that's really valuable to kind of keep the ship righted for your team as you're, in the middle of the season or toward the end of the season. So Jake Haener was not on the draft radar whatsoever last year. And I think now he's played his way into being a 3rd round consideration.
That's an important point. Just because a quarterback goes on day 3 doesn't mean he's going to be a bust, because typically you're grooming those guys to be backups. And as Mike White will attest, that's a pretty important job when your number's called to the point where he, outplayed Zach Wilson, and you can make of that whatever you want to. But it's important. Kirk Cousins was a 4th round pick the same year they took RG3 first overall. Kirk Cousins is still around making it happen. All right, let's snake draft this thing, Trapasso. You also have Aidan Hutchinson, and then we'll go to Josh to talk about his defensive guy. Aidan Hutchinson, I said this last week, 2 years ago when I watched him over the summer, day 3 guy. Last year he was improved, but I wouldn't have taken him in the first round, I don't think. And now he's just crushing fools, as the kids like to say.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like he was someone early on those Michigan defenses that I think you mentioned last week, Ryan, like with Chase Winovich and Rashawn Gary, Kwity Paye. Like he flashed a little bit, but he did feel like early in his career, probably a day 3 pick. Seemed, I thought, earlier in his career at Michigan, like oversized, not super explosive. Last year, in those 3 games that he played, he generated a pressure like 12% of the time, which is not really that good if you're a college player. Felt like maybe a 3rd or a 4th round pick could be a solid player, but never a superstar. And this year, he's generating a pressure over 20% of the time. He was high up there on Bruce Feldman's freak list. I think I mentioned that last week too. Just looks like the complete edge rusher. Like maybe not someone that will be a 15-sack guy in the NFL, but I think he's a 3-down player because he has an NFL body. The athleticism is certainly there to bend the corner. And I love that he has like a legitimate, refined arsenal of pass rushing moves. Like you don't just win with power or just athleticism at the NFL level, especially right away. Like I think Rashawn Gary has kind of become a more refined player. Aidan Hutchinson can come in from day 1 and be a quality rookie player for whichever team drafts him and be almost an alpha rusher, the number 1 rusher on his team. So not like from out of obscurity, but someone that was probably a 3rd round pick in the summer and is now, I think you can write him into the 1st round. He's a lock to go in those first 32 selections.
Yeah, I think we'll see how this thing plays out, but I feel like he's a top 10 pick.
Yeah, me
I
too.
don't want to speak for you, Josh. I feel like you were less high on him than maybe me and Traps. I don't remember that, but and you can comment on that. But also, I want to hear you talk about Travon Walker again, another Georgia deep cut. We talk about we know all the playmakers in Georgia. Starts with Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Darian Kendrick. It goes on and on. They probably have half that defensive side of the ball drafted at some point. Tell us about Travon Walker and how he sticks out on a team full of draft picks.
Yeah, I do like Hutchinson a lot. I just happen to like George Karlaftis a little bit more. I like what Michigan has done with their defensive linemen this year with the new defensive coordinator. I thought how they came prepared to the NFL was a little behind the times the last couple of years. So I'm happy to see that, David Ajabo was fantastic over the weekend too. So like Michigan's really developing some guys up front. My guy, Travon Walker, this is not so much of a, what is he doing now that he didn't do last year? It's the fact that this guy was not, draft eligible last year. So you're kind of familiarizing yourself with him now. And he's been fantastic. I mean, he's a little bit of a tweener in terms of his size, but he plays just this fast, like a caged animal almost. And it's been fun to watch along that Georgia defensive line because they'll send those tackle end stunts all the time. They like to mix things up, and they've got some great talent up front with Jalen Carter, the true sophomore. They've got Jordan Davis, the nose tackle, who is becoming more of a pass rush presence. I mean, he's more than just your standard nose tackle. And then Travon Walker is a guy that you're seeing create chaos through those stunts. I think he's risen to day 2. Just a really, really good player, high activity, knows what to do with his hands, just a really good player all around.
I say it every week, and I just reminded this as you watch SEC football. Everyone in the SEC is a dude, and just about any of those guys could get drafted, and you could be like, oh, okay, I see that. So I'm with you 100%, even though I haven't watched Travon Walker. I don't doubt it. I now find myself, as I'm watching one player, especially in these SEC matchups, I'll make sure I'll see who's on the Seniorville watch list, watch those guys, and then see whoever. And inevitably, 2 or 3 guys just stick out because, again, they're all insanely athletic, and they all dominated their high schools, and I'm sure Travon Walker is no different. All right, Josh, give me the 30-second thumbnail on Bernard Raymond, the Central Michigan offensive tackle.
Yeah, coming out of the MAC, you just want to see consistency. You want to see his ability against those Power 5 opponents. Struggled a little bit against Missouri early this year. Pad level got a little bit high, but just a tremendous athlete that you see the potential in his game. Never panics. He's got controlled hands. He knows how to move his feet once engaged. There's just a lot to like about his game. A guy that I think could possibly enter the conversation as a first-round pick. In fact, I had him in my first round last year. Just a really talented, athletic offensive tackle.
All right, Traps, what do you got on Zach Charbonnet, or is it Charbonneau?
It's Charbonnet, actually.
Charbonnet, UCLA running back.
He was at Michigan last year, and like he looked good. Like he looked like, okay, this is probably an NFL player. Maybe would be undrafted or 6th or 7th rounder. Transferring to UCLA, I think, and I want to hear what Josh thinks about this too. He looks a lot more dynamic. Like he's 6'1", 220. That's what he's listed at. And that's not really ideal running back size, being that tall. But this is not someone that's strictly a power runner. Like I've seen him break away through the 2nd level and into the 3rd level with a lot more speed than he ever showed at Michigan. His yards after contact rate is above 3, and it was never even 2.3 during his first 2 seasons at Michigan. There was a run against Hawaii. Yeah, it's Hawaii's defense, where it was similar to like the Marshawn Lynch run against the Saints, where he ran through about 4 or 5 guys. You think, okay, that's a great run. And then he breaks through and was able to accelerate down the field for a long gain. So Zach Charbonnet in what I think is actually a pretty good running back class, even though I think even as we progress, we realize like you can get Khalil Herberts in the 6th round that can be really good players. In a really good running back class at the top with Breece Hall, Isaiah Spiller, and Kenneth Walker, I think Zach Charbonnet is kind of playing himself into that next tier right below them. Now, is that the 3rd round, the 4th round, the 5th round? I don't really think it matters because wherever he's picked, I think he can be that Khalil Herbert who might not start as a rookie early in his career. But then if he gets called upon in his rookie season, in his second year, he can be a very productive running back because he has the size. There's a lot of natural power that he showed at Michigan, but I like he's kind of turned up his speed this season for the UCLA Bruins.
Yeah, you mentioned old Kenneth Walker there. I think we got a question from a listener here, a viewer, Dominic Petrillo. What kind of rise in stock prices Kenneth Walker III had this year? Is he up to a late first-round pick as a running back? So he transferred from Wake Forest. Wake Forest clearly doesn't need him. I mean, they're undefeated, I think, as we sit here. Michigan State needed him last weekend when he scored 5 touchdowns against Michigan in an absolute bonkers game. And the thing is, I haven't watched him closely this year, but I was looking at his numbers. He went off early in the season. He had a couple north of 200-yard games, and then he struggled, in quotation marks. He was like 83 yards prior to the Michigan State game. I think they were on their bye before the Michigan game. I think Michigan State was on their bye before they played that. And then he just ran all over Michigan. So I'll let you start, Traps. What are your thoughts on Kenneth Walker? You mentioned him in the conversation with Spiller and Hall. Are you taking him in the first round?
I wouldn't take him in the first round, but I am very much against picking any running back in the first round, so I'm a little biased toward that. I just wrote about him yesterday at CBSSports.com, and I know Josh previewed him going into that 5-touchdown game, so he can talk about him too. He feels like probably a mid to late round, second round pick. I don't think he's incredibly fast down the field, but again, like similar to Zach Charbonnet and really Breece Hall and Isaiah Spiller, he has that NFL feature back body. This is not someone that can't bang between the tackles, that's undersized, that's going to feel like he's going to have a short shelf life because he can't take the punishment at the NFL level. And he's, for being big, for having a thick lower half, Kenneth Walker is very elusive. We saw, everyone watched that Michigan State game, spins in the backfield, runs with multiple cuts where he was making defenders miss in the space. When you can do that at like 6 foot and 215, 220 pounds and be as productive as he is, I think you will be picked probably on day 2 and be kind of penciled in as the starter once you're in the NFL.
What do you think, Josh?
So based on the grade that I have now, and this was based on last season, how I evaluated him, he would be the 157th player, which, there's a lot of adjustment that has to take place. There's a lot of guys that I haven't watched this year related to the past year, but I would assume he's going to get a bump from that. I don't think he's going to rise to that first round projection. I think Traps is probably spot on with somewhere on day 2, maybe bleed into day 3. And a guy that, just overall, I have a similar philosophy where I probably wouldn't take a running back in the first round unless I felt like that was the only piece to my offense that I was missing. Like with Kansas City a couple of years ago, when they took Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I felt like, they looked at that as the last piece to their offense. Now we know that they needed some offensive line help, but at the time they felt like a running back would really unlock what they were able to do. And that felt like a luxury they were, willing to take coming off the Super Bowl. But generally speaking, I'm not a fan of taking a running back in the first round. I know Ryan is obviously familiar with that. My many soapbox rants last year with Najee Harris, who's played well this year. But yeah, Kenneth Walker, I don't think he's going to be that first round type running back, but a guy that has certainly elevated his stock this year.
Yeah, here's how I think of it. And Josh is a Browns guy. I'm a Steelers homer. But Nick Chubb's second round pick. Kareem Hunt was a third round pick, I believe. Like Kenneth Walker ain't those guys. And you could say those guys were underdrafted, or maybe I don't think Kareem Hunt had off-field issues. I think it's just a small school guy. So, yeah, you're not taking Kenneth Walker, or you shouldn't take anyone before any of those guys. It is maybe one way to think about it, unless, as Josh notes, you're filling a specific hole and you're Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. But even in looking back, Chiefs ain't infallible, so they perhaps should have gone another direction. But that's what makes the draft so fun. I'll go quickly through my guys, my risers. Nakobe Dean, who I absolutely love. In fact, he's now my linebacker 1. I hadn't watched Christian Harris. I watched one game earlier this year. I hadn't watched him closely, but he's not having a great season. And it feels like one of those sort of Alabama final year linebacker situations, which is weird. And maybe it's just coincidental, but I love Nakobe Dean. I love Devin Lloyd out of Utah. I'll mention quickly Akeem Ekwonu, excuse me. Izzy at Icky, I think is his nickname, the NC State offensive tackle. And I watched 2 of his games last week, and I was just blown away like I need a nickname for him. I don't want to call him maybe like Dr. Pancake because he's just crushing guys. I like Waffle Iron, although that doesn't convey pancake status because he just runs over guys. And I'm like, why is draft media calling him an interior offensive player? And I was texting with a scout. He's like, no, he's a tackle all day long. I was like, that's what he looks like. Like, I don't know if his arms are short or not, but he's rarely off balance. He's incredibly like compact for an offensive tackle. I think you mentioned the freak list earlier, Traps. He's on Feldman's freak list. I'm playing him at tackle. If he can't play there, then we'll make some adjustments. But whatever, I'm putting him there. And finally, I'll mention Jameson Williams, who I love, had to transfer out of Ohio State to get playing time at Alabama, where he has been absolutely electric. I don't know if he's a first-round pick. I had him going in the first round of the latest mock draft just to mix it up a little bit. But as we get through this process, it's not outrageous to think that maybe he slips into the first round. I know that previously Josh has had Pickens going in the first round. He's coming off an injury. I've had Justin Ross going in the first round. He's coming off an injury 2 years ago, and then he's playing on a terrible offense. So there's no reason to think that Jameson Williams couldn't make that. Josh, I'll start with you, and then Traps, you can follow. Give me your 30 seconds on where you're at on Jameson Williams.
Honestly, Jameson Williams is one that I need to spend more time on. I haven't watched much of him this year since he got to Alabama. I was kind of waiting for a sizable amount of tape to get out before I kind of made a final verdict on him. But just talking about the depth at Ohio State is insane. You've got Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. He can't get on the field with those two guys. And he moves to Alabama, and now you're talking about a top 30 talent in your rankings, had to transfer out of Ohio State to get playing time. And it's absolutely absurd. But he probably is the best wide receiver on that team. We'll talk about one of the other guys on that team here shortly, but Jameson Williams, is a guy that I'm eager to study a little bit more moving forward.
I've actually watched him quite a bit. I think he's going to go in the first round. Like, I think at this point, not just because it's Alabama, watching like the way he moves in and out of his routes after the catch. I thought in a lot of those, like especially the Florida game, there was a couple catches that were just run of the mill, like over the middle, and he was making defenders miss. He like stylistically, he kind of reminds me of Jerry Jeudy. Like Jeudy was this lankier. He's probably a little bit less dynamic than Jerry Jeudy, but very smooth in his movements. That's how I feel watching Jameson Williams. He's a little bit bigger than Jerry Jeudy was. He's listed at 6'2". I think he's got a bigger catch radius. And as Alabama's playing in these marquee games down the stretch, probably the college football playoff, I think with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, those are the entrenched first rounders. But the wide receiver class after that, there are a lot of talented players that I think people will like, but there's not like a consensus number 3 or number 4 right now. And I think ultimately Jameson Williams finds his way inside those first 32 picks.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think Debo has a question for us. Hit the button, Debo. There it is. Oh, our guy, Lucas Pulowski. I don't know if you guys know this. Lucas won the Brinson Sucks hat, the first annual Brinson Sucks hat giveaway. So he's reveling in that prize. And Lucas asked, any players that will fall because they used their extra COVID year and might be a 24, 25 year? That's a great question. And that's something I have on my list to ask NFL folks. How concerned are they just about not only the extra COVID year, but about guys who may not be vaccinated and how that affects their status as they come into a situation where we know that if you're not vaccinated, you have to go through a whole bunch of set of protocols. Maybe that changes as we go a year further away from COVID. But what do you think, guys?
I can chime in on this. Not because of the age, but Daniel Falele from Minnesota sat out last year and not exactly answering the question, but I think after 2019, the 6'8", 390 pound, 400 pound right tackle that was pretty green and very young, like looked like, hey, this could be the guy just because of his size and because he's not super stiff. If he plays in 2020 and plays really well, we could be talking about him as a first round pick. He opts out. And then this year, he's actually one of my fallers that we're going to talk about. And then I don't think he's gotten much more athletic. I don't know if he's gotten any more powerful. So that COVID year probably hurt him quite a bit. I know we had some guys fall in the 2021 draft because they sat out ultimately. But I think Daniel Falele is the one that he's not crazy old. But that year, I think, hurt him because he had a lot of momentum going into last season before he decided not to play. And he hasn't really been able to pick up that steam heading into, the 2022 draft cycle. Yeah,
I liked Falele last year. I haven't watched him closely this year. One guy who it's helped, I don't know if it was COVID related, but he did come back, Kenny Pickett. He's 24 years old. He would have been a day 3 pick last year. He's a day 2 pick for me. We'll see if some team disagrees, but that is what it is. All right, let's get to the fallers. We'll go to another quarterback, and I mean, this is just a consensus, but Josh, I'll let you start.
Mm-hmm.
If you're Spencer Rattler, I may have asked this last week, and I'll ask it every week until you have a resolution. Are you coming out? Do you stay? Do you transfer?
I think he has to transfer just to kind of mend his image at this point. I think that was probably what took the biggest hit in all of this. A very confident guy. He was, on a Netflix, I think it was Netflix series before he even got to college. So he kind of came with some fanfare. Understandably, may have thought he was the hot shot on campus. And I think everybody was kind of hoping to see a little bit, more maturity, more control of that offense. And we just didn't see that this year to the point where he's now the backup to Caleb Williams. So I think
that ain't changing either.
No, it's not. Caleb Williams is fantastic. I think there was some buzz before the season that Rattler might not be able to hold him off long, and it certainly came to fruition. But I think it would be in his best interest to transfer, see what other options are out there for him, and kind of reboot his image, so to speak, because I think the talent is still there. He just has to have a little bit more maturity and, kind of take ownership of some things and, continue improving as a quarterback. I think that's probably the best case scenario for him.
Who is the I always forget his name. Who's the Wake Forest quarterback that transferred to Georgia last year and then opted out?
Jamie Newman.
So Spencer Rattler isn't Jamie Newman, but I feel like if Spencer Rattler came out, he might have a Jamie Newman situation where he doesn't get drafted. Like, I'm not seeing he's coming out, but I would imagine he's having conversations with his agents and whomever. The NFL's letting him know, teams are letting him know. But Jamie Newman, last summer, some of us, myself included, he has the potential to be a first-round pick when we put him in the July mock draft or whatever. And then he didn't have a chance. He chose not to play at Georgia, and I respect that, but it certainly affected his professional aspirations. All right, Traps, we talked about Jameson Williams earlier. His teammate John Metchie you have as a faller Alabama wide receiver. I think he's been injured for part of the season, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he hasn't quite lived up to expectations.
Yeah, he leads Alabama in receptions, but I thought John Metchie, like playing behind all those first-round picks last couple of years, to see him like produce in his freshman and sophomore seasons was good, but he was really selling himself as this downfield vertical threat guy. But he's averaging under 12 yards per carry this season, and you could kind of make the argument that, hey, he's kind of showing that he's well-rounded, but he's not great after the catch. I think compared to those Alabama receivers, which all were first-round picks, he's not that dynamic of an athlete. I would have liked to seen him maybe not have 50 or 60 or 70 catches, but just be that deep threat and sell yourself that way. So I was hoping we would see a more electric player in John Metchie, but I actually think that's Jameson Williams in this Alabama offense. And one quick thing, Spencer Rattler should transfer to Notre Dame. I think that's the best scenario for him. We know Notre Dame is completely open to using the transfer portal. You would be on TV a ton. If you only lose a game or maybe go undefeated, you're in the college football playoff. I think that's what Spencer Rattler should do. He should not enter this draft class and transfer to South Bend, Indiana.
I think Spencer Rattler should transfer to William & Mary. He would crush it there. And if you lose 2 games, no one cares. And you could be the next Joe Flacco who left Pitt to go to Delaware. And look at him. He's elite.
Yeah.
All right, Josh, let's circle back to you. Of course, you go offensive tackle for both risers and fallers. You sticking with your Kentucky guy. Dare Rosenthal. I know about Darian Kennard, who is incredibly fun to watch. Tell me about Dare Rosenthal.
Yeah, this is an example that I can come to the table unbiased. Okay, so Dare Rosenthal is an LSU transfer, really athletic guy, kind of banking on his potential. When I first evaluated him, his initial ranking was probably in the day 2 range. Was just kind of hoping to see more consistency, and we haven't seen that this year. He's lunging, he's pad level has been high. Like, there's a lot of technical stuff that needs to be cleaned up. So I think he would be a candidate to come back to school and really improve his draft stock, because I do think he has that level of potential. But to this point in the season, I don't think he's helped himself.
And Traps, I'm gonna go to your guy. You talked about Falele already, but I want to ask about Adam Anderson, because I watched Adam Anderson and I think this is a guy that needs to get a lot stronger, probably gain 15, 20 pounds. And he is not Brian Burns. Brian Burns he was long, lanky, and was much stronger than he looked to be at 230. He was less than that, probably, if we're being honest, when he was when he was at Florida State. So tell me about Adam Anderson. I think right now I have a 3rd round grade on him. What's your thoughts on him?
Yeah, this one makes me sad because over the summer watching Adam Anderson, I was like, this guy could be like a top 5 pick because like some of the wins he had last year on that Georgia defensive line for being, like you mentioned, as skinny and lacking power as he was and how young he was. I was like, if he can build on that, like this could be like an all-time prospect. Shows up to Georgia this year. I don't really think he's gained any weight. I don't think he's any more powerful. And because he's now a year older, Georgia's like incorporated him into more of a full-time role. He was like very sparingly used last season and generated a pressure almost 30% of the time. Like that's an insane rate. This year, he's at 11%. So like, I think offensive lines are like, hey, if you can deal with his lack of power or his speed around the edge and play with some power when facing him, he's just not going to be able to win to the quarterback. So Adam Anderson, similar to Rosenthal, could maybe be someone that, who does have a lot of hype playing on this Georgia defense, but might actually come back for another season with the Bulldogs because he just didn't build on such a good 2020 season. And he was a huge recruit. I think the Brian Burns potential is there, but he's not Brian Burns at this point. Someone that can really bend the corner. The pass rush moves are there, but when you just have no power to your game and can't really set a strong edge, I think you're going to have a hard time not only just contributing in the NFL, but going early in the draft as well.
Yeah, Brian Burns had Marvin Wilson playing in the center, but this is a completely different animal. We've heard Josh talk about Travon Walker. We know about Jalen Carter. We know about Jordan Davis. You're getting one-on-ones all day if you're Adam Anderson, and you're not winning consistently. And I hope he does come back. All right, let's run through my fallers here. I don't want to call them losers. That's sort of rude. I mentioned Christian Harris already. It's just weird that he hasn't yet. I think he had a chance to be one of the best off-ball linebackers to come out of Alabama in quite some time. Mack Wilson. How's Mack Wilson doing in Cleveland for you, Josh? Yeah, so he was a 4th round pick. There was some 1st round buzz about him when he was coming out. Last year, the off-ball linebacker who suffered the ACL, he wasn't even drafted. I can't remember his name. I apologize.
Dylan Moses.
Yeah, Dylan Moses.
Right?
Yeah, we love Dylan Moses, and then he got injured, and maybe he bounces back from that, but he wasn't able to do that before the draft process. So, Christian Harris feels like he's sort of going down that path. I think he's a day 2 guy for me now, but he needs to start balling out. I mentioned Kobe Dean, I mentioned Devin Lloyd, and these off-ball linebackers, you can find these guys, these athletes, sideline to sideline guys, to do what you want them to do in terms of the athleticism, and it's just a matter of honing that. And Christian Harris, the athleticism hasn't quite popped this year. Myjai Sanders, we talked about Adam Anderson. Myjai Sanders, I watched over the summer, said he needs to get stronger. And there, again, a lot of buzz about him. That Cincinnati defense is actually pretty good. We know about Ahmad Gardner. And Kobe Bryant, the other cornerback who's playing really well this season. Sanders is not strong enough for me, and he doesn't win consistently, and he's not a 1st round pick for me. That doesn't mean he won't be, but I just haven't seen enough consistently to be blown away from him by him. And in fact, Enigbare from South Carolina is where Sanders needs to be, and he's not playing and play out as consistent as I want him to be. But I think he's going down the path based on what we saw last year in terms of progression. And finally, I'll mention Keaton Slovis. Like over the summer, I was like, Keaton Slovis, he could be the guy that makes the next step. He could have sort of a Joe Burrow leap from day 3 to maybe late round 1 if things go really well, or day 2, early day 2. And that team stinks. They fired their coach. Drake London is the only bright spot on offense for me as I watch from a distance. And Keaton Slovis just struggled. Josh, I'll ask you, any of those names stick out to you that you want to defend them, or maybe you agree with what I'm saying?
No, generally speaking, I thought all of us brought good risers and fallers to the list. I can't say that there were really any that I disagreed with. A couple of those guys I just never really had rated that highly. A couple of them, have been fallers for me as well. Myjai being one of them, Christian Sanders, or not Myjai being one of them. Sorry, that would be Christian Harris. I think he's just looked disinterested at times, but those guys, Myjai Sanders, John Metchie, Adam Anderson, like I've probably put Anderson and Sanders in my 1st round mock drafts at various points in time, but that's more so because I'm not overly confident with the amount of talent that's available at the bottom of the 1st round. You were kind of hoping to see some of the potential come through, and we just haven't really seen that so far this year. So generally speaking, I was happy with everybody that you guys brought to the table. We each did 3. So the fact that you guys brought some that I wanted to talk about as well, I think kind of shows we're on similar pages as far as how we're seeing these guys.
Traps, any thoughts on these last 3 guys? Let's see. Oh, there we go. We're getting just comments about Brinson being terrible.
That's a good way to end the show. No, I think Josh hit the nail on the head. And your pick of Christian Harris is a good one, and that he looked pretty athletic last year, but I wanted to see more explosion, and I haven't seen that. And then Josh having Spencer Rattler, like, we had to spend time on him because no one has fallen off a cliff more than him. Like, you looked around at the internet in the summer, and he's the number 1 overall player. It's going to be him, then Kayvon Thibodeau, and now we're talking about should he enter the draft or not. So I think all good picks. There was no one that I really disagreed with, risers or fallers.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Episode 2 in the books. Don't forget, later today, 3:30 p.m., there will be another live show. Me, Brinson, Breach, talking about the trade deadline stuff. And then we'll be back next Tuesday at 1 p.m. from now until the end of time for NFL Mock Draft Show number 3. Josh, Traps, see you then, buddies.